The November wind howled across the Dakota plains like a wounded animal, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. The grasslands, once golden and alive with summer's touch, now lay brittle and gray beneath a darkening sky. In the distance, the small town of Cedar Ridge huddled against the approaching storm, its weathered buildings standing like tired sentinels against the harsh landscape. At the edge of town, where the last vestiges of civilization gave way to the untamed wilderness, stood a modest wooden cabin. Smoke curled from its stone chimney, the only sign of life in an otherwise desolate stretch of land. This was the home of Clara Morrison, a young widow whose very existence had become a subject of whispered speculation among the townspeople. Clara stood at her window, watching the storm clouds gather with practiced indifference. At 26, she had already learned that the weather, like the opinions of others, was something beyond her control. Her auburn hair, pinned severely back from her face, framed features that might have been considered handsome, if not for the perpetual shadow of sorrow that lingered in her green eyes. 2 years had passed since Thomas Morrison had been laid to rest in the churchyard. Yet the town's memory proved far more enduring than their compassion. In a place where superstition ran as deep as the wells they dug for water, a young widow was viewed with the same suspicion as a broken mirror or a black cat crossing one's path. The circumstances of Thomas's death, shot down in a dispute over water rights, had done nothing to soften their judgment. If anything, it had convinced them that Clara carried misfortune like a disease. Inside the cabin, Clara moved with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to solitude. The main room served multiple purposes: kitchen, sitting area, and workspace, where she mended clothes for the few townspeople willing to employ her. A narrow doorway led to the single bedroom, and beyond that, a small root cellar where she stored what provisions she could afford. The furnishings were sparse but clean: a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, though she rarely needed the second, a rocking chair near the fireplace that Thomas had made with his own hands. On the mantel sat their wedding photograph, the only luxury she had refused to sell despite the lean months that followed his death. In it, Thomas stood tall and proud beside her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder, both of them unaware of how brief their happiness would prove. As evening descended, Clara set about her nightly routine. She checked the shutters, ensuring they were latched tight against the coming storm. The wind had picked up considerably, rattling the windows in their frames and sending drafts through the gaps in the walls. She added another log to the fire, watching the flames leap and dance as they consumed the dry wood. From her meager pantry, she retrieved a heel of bread, some preserved beans, and a small portion of salt pork. It would make a simple meal, but she had learned to be grateful for what she had. As she prepared her supper, her mind wandered to the irony of her situation. Thomas had brought her to Cedar Ridge with promises of prosperity, of the life they would build together on the frontier. Now she remained, trapped by poverty and circumstance, unwelcome in the very town he had chosen as their home. The people of Cedar Ridge lived by their own harsh code, one that left little room for compassion or second chances. Sheriff Brennan kept order with an iron fist and a quick trigger finger, more concerned with maintaining his authority than dispensing justice. The shopkeepers charged her higher prices, when they would serve her at all. Even the minister's wife, who preached charity every Sunday, crossed the street to avoid passing too close to the widow Morrison. Clara understood their fear, even if she couldn't forgive it. In a world where death came sudden and often, where drought could destroy a year's crops and disease could wipe out entire families, people clung to whatever illusions of control they could fashion. If shunning a widow made them feel safer, more blessed, more likely to see another sunrise, then perhaps she couldn't blame them entirely. The storm arrived with the full darkness, announced by a flash of lightning that illuminated the prairie in stark relief. Thunder followed, rolling across the flatlands like the drums of an advancing army. The first snowflakes began to fall, fat and wet, quickly obscuring the view from her windows. Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and settled into the rocking chair with her mending basket. The needle moved in steady rhythm through the fabric, her fingers working by memory and firelight. Outside, the wind grew fiercer, driving the snow horizontal and creating drifts against the cabin walls. The old building groaned under the assault but held firm. Thomas had built it well, with his own hands and dreams of permanence. A sudden sound made her pause, needle suspended mid-stitch. It had come from the direction of the small stable where she kept her aging mare, Buttercup. The horse was her last valuable possession, the one thing she had refused to sell despite offers from the livery stable. Without Buttercup, she would be truly stranded, unable to make the journey to neighboring homesteads for work or supplies. Clara listened intently, but the sound didn't repeat. Probably just the wind, she told herself, or perhaps Buttercup expressing her displeasure at the weather. Still, something made her set aside her mending and move once more to the window. The snow had thickened into a near-solid curtain of white, making it impossible to see more than a few feet beyond the glass. Then she heard it again, unmistakably the sound of a horse's whinny, but not Buttercup's familiar call. This was deeper, more distressed. Her heart quickened as she considered the possibilities. Travelers caught in the storm were not uncommon, though most had the sense to seek shelter in town before venturing onto the open prairie. Those who didn't often paid a steep price for their foolishness. Clara hesitated, torn between self-preservation and basic human concern. Opening her door on a night like this invited not just the cold, but potential danger. A woman alone had few defenses against those who might take advantage of her isolation. Yet the thought of someone freezing to death within yards of shelter sat heavy on her conscience. Another sound decided her, a crash from the stable area, followed by silence more ominous than any noise. Clara quickly lit a lantern and pulled on Thomas's old coat, which she had kept for its warmth despite the pain of wearing it. She took down the shotgun from above the door, checked that it was loaded, and steeled herself for whatever waited outside. The wind nearly tore the door from her grasp as she opened it, sending a whirlwind of snow into the cabin. She pushed forward, holding the lantern high and the shotgun ready, though she could barely see through the storm's fury. Each step was a struggle against the wind, her feet sinking into rapidly accumulating drifts. The stable loomed out of the darkness, its door hanging open and banging against the frame. Clara's lantern light fell upon a scene that made her breath catch. A black horse, saddled and heaving with exhaustion, stood trembling inside, Buttercup pressed against the far wall, eyes rolling with fear. But it was the dark form crumpled in the straw that drew Clara's attention and sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the cold. A man lay motionless near the horse's feet, face down in the straw. Even in the dim lantern light, Clara could see the dark stains spreading beneath him, black against the golden bedding. Whether he was alive or dead, she couldn't tell. But one thing was certain: this was no ordinary traveler seeking shelter from the storm. Clara set the lantern on a wooden beam and knelt beside the fallen man, her hands trembling as she reached to turn him over. He was heavy, dead weight in her arms, and it took all her strength to roll him onto his back. In the flickering light, she could see he was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30 years, with dark hair matted with sweat and snow. His face, beneath the stubble and dirt, had sharp, defined features that spoke of hard living. Blood seeped through his coat at the shoulder and along his ribs. His breathing came shallow and ragged, each exhale visible in the cold air. Clara pressed her fingers to his neck, finding a pulse, weak but steady. Whatever had happened to him, he was fighting to stay alive. The man's eyes suddenly snapped open, dark and alert despite his condition. His hand moved with surprising speed to his hip, where Clara now noticed the worn handle of a Colt revolver. She froze, acutely aware of how vulnerable she was, alone with this stranger who clearly knew violence intimately. "Easy," she said softly, raising her hands to show they were empty. "You're hurt. Let me help you." His eyes searched her face, then darted around the stable, taking in his surroundings with the practiced wariness of a hunted animal. "Where?" His voice came out as a croak. "Where am I?" "Cedar Ridge, my stable. You collapsed here." Clara kept her voice calm, though her heart raced. "You're bleeding badly. If you don't let me help, you'll die." A bitter laugh escaped him, turning into a cough that brought blood to his lips. "Might be better that way." His hand fell away from the gun, his strength failing. "They'll be coming." Clara's mind raced. An injured man, armed. Speaking of pursuit, she knew what this meant. Outlaws weren't uncommon in the territories. Men who lived outside the law for reasons both justified and not. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to fetch Sheriff Brennan and claim the likely bounty. It would be enough money to see her through the winter, maybe longer. She looked at the man's face again, saw the resignation there mixed with a defiance that reminded her painfully of Thomas in his final moments. Her husband had died because powerful men had wanted his land, had twisted the law to serve their purposes. Justice and law weren't always the same thing on the frontier. "Can you stand?" she asked, making her decision. "We need to get you inside before you freeze." Surprise flickered in his eyes. "You don't even know what I've done." "I know you're bleeding in my stable during a blizzard." Clara replied, "That's enough for now." She chose mercy in the night. The thought rang through her mind like a church bell, clear and irreversible. With effort, she helped him to his feet. He swayed dangerously, his weight nearly taking them both down. He was taller than she'd realized, lean but solid with muscle. Together, they staggered through the storm toward the cabin, Clara bearing as much of his weight as her frame could manage. His horse followed unbidden, seeking the warmth and shelter of human habitation. Inside the cabin, Clara guided him to the floor near the fireplace. In the better light, she could see the full extent of his injuries. The shoulder wound was a clean hole, a bullet wound. Certainly, the injury along his ribs looked like a graze, painful but less serious. Both were still bleeding, though the cold had likely slowed the flow and saved his life. "I need to clean and bind these wounds," she said, already moving to gather supplies. "It's going to hurt." "Do what you need to," he replied through gritted teeth. His eyes tracked her movements, still wary despite his weakness. "Why are you doing this?" Clara paused in collecting clean cloth and her sewing kit. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe because I'm tired of watching men die." She helped him out of his coat and shirt, trying not to notice the other scars that marked his torso, evidence of a violent life. Working by firelight, she cleaned the wounds with whiskey from Thomas's last bottle, the one she'd been saving for she didn't know what. The man bit down on a piece of leather to keep from crying out, his body rigid with pain. The shoulder wound was beyond her skill to properly treat. The bullet was still lodged inside, but she did what she could, packing it with clean cloth and binding it tight. The rib wound she stitched closed with careful, neat sutures, her hands steady despite everything. "You've done this before," he observed when she finished, his voice hoarse. "My father was a doctor back east. I learned a few things before." Clara trailed off. Before she'd run away to marry Thomas. Before she'd traded a life of comfort for love and adventure. It doesn't matter now. She helped him to the bed in the back room, her bed. She tried not to think about that, and covered him with every blanket she owned. His fever was already rising, his skin hot despite the shivering. She knew the next hours would be critical. Returning to the main room, Clara sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. What had she done? Harboring a wounded outlaw, treating his injuries, giving him shelter. Any of these actions could see her hanged alongside him if the law caught up. Yet she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Not yet. The man's saddlebags lay where she'd dropped them by the door. She shouldn't look. Knew it was an invasion of privacy. But she needed to know what she'd gotten herself into. Inside, she found the expected items. Ammunition, dried beef, a flask of whiskey. But there were unexpected things too. A well-worn book of poetry. A silver pocket watch with an inscription too worn to read. And most surprisingly, a Deputy U.S. Marshal's badge. Clara stared at the badge, her mind trying to reconcile it with the man lying in her bed. Outlaws sometimes carried false identification, she knew, or took trophies from their victims. But something about the way he'd carried himself, even wounded and wary, spoke of a man who'd once stood on the side of law. A moan from the bedroom drew her attention. She found him delirious with fever, muttering words she couldn't quite catch. She spent the next hours cooling his forehead with damp cloths, forcing water between his lips when she could, fighting to keep him anchored to life. Sometime near dawn, his fever broke. His eyes opened, clearer now, fixing on her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara Morrison," she replied. "And yours?" He hesitated. Then, "Jake Hartley." "Well, Mr. Hartley, you're going to live, though that shoulder needs proper doctoring." Clara stood, suddenly needing distance. "There's a badge in your saddlebag." His jaw tightened. "Former, not anymore. What happened?" Jake closed his eyes. "I found evidence that Judge Watson and 2 of his hired guns killed a homesteader family for their land. When I tried to arrest them, they turned it around. Said I'd done it. That I'd gone rogue. Watson has half the territory in his pocket. My word against his meant nothing." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dying storm outside. Judge Watson, the same man who'd presided over the sham trial after Thomas's death, who'd ruled it a justified shooting despite witnesses saying otherwise. "So you ran," she said. "I fought first. Killed one of Watson's men in self-defense when they came for me. That's what turned me from dismissed lawman to wanted outlaw." Jake's laugh was bitter. "They'll hang me for sure now, if they catch me." Clara moved to the window, watching the snow still falling but gentler now. The blizzard was passing, which meant danger would soon follow. Men would come looking for Jake Hartley, following the trail of blood and desperation that had led him to her door. "You should have left me in the stable," Jake said quietly. "Now you're implicated too." "Maybe," Clara agreed. "Or maybe we're both already damned in this town's eyes. So what's one more sin?" She turned back to him, seeing clearly now the lines that pain and injustice had carved into his features. Here was a man who'd tried to stand for what was right and been crushed for it, just as Thomas had been crushed for refusing to sell his water rights. "Rest now," she said. "We'll figure out what comes next when you're stronger." As Jake drifted back to sleep, Clara returned to her vigil by the fire. Outside, the storm was breaking, and with the dawn would come decisions that would change everything. She had chosen mercy in the darkness, not knowing where it would lead. Now, as pale light began to filter through the windows, she could only wait and see what price that mercy would demand. The storm had left the world transformed, buried beneath a blanket of white that sparkled in the weak afternoon sun. Drifts piled high against the cabin walls, and the wind still moaned through the canyon passes, carrying the distant howl of wolves down from the mountains. Clara stood at the window, watching for any sign of movement on the horizon, knowing that Jake's pursuers wouldn't be far behind once the weather cleared. Behind her, Jake sat propped against the wall near the fire, his shoulder bound tight and his face pale but alert. They had spent the morning in careful conversation, each revealing pieces of themselves like poker players showing cards one at a time. "You haven't asked for the details," Jake said, breaking a comfortable silence, "about what Watson's men did to that family." Clara continued staring out the window. "Would knowing change anything?" "Maybe not, but you should know what kind of man you're sheltering." His voice carried a weight that made her turn. "The Millers, husband, wife, 3 children. The youngest wasn't even 5. Watson wanted their creek access, offered to buy them out. When they refused." He didn't finish, but Clara could fill in the rest. She'd heard similar stories, seen the results of what happened when powerful men wanted something in this lawless land. "Thomas knew Ben Miller," she said quietly. "They helped each other during the drought 2 summers ago. Good people." She paused, remembering. After Thomas died, Ben came by, offered to help with the harvest. I was too proud to accept. Watson had them shot in their beds, made it look like an Indian raid. I found evidence, shell casings from army rifles, boot prints that didn't match any tribe in the area. When I confronted Watson's men, they laughed, said no one would believe a half-breed marshal over a federal judge. Clara's eyes widened slightly. She studied Jake's features more carefully now, seeing what she'd missed before, the subtle cast to his cheekbones, the deep black of his hair. Mixed blood was another mark against him in the territory's harsh social hierarchy. My mother was Lakota, he confirmed, reading her look. Father was a cavalry sergeant who actually married her, gave me his name. It was enough to get me a badge when the territory needed men who could track and speak both languages. Not enough to make my word count against a white judge. Clara poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot she'd kept warm on the stove, handing one to Jake. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and she was startled by the warmth that spread from that brief contact. "Tell me about Thomas," Jake said. "You don't have to, but I'd like to know." Clara settled into her rocking chair, cradling her cup. Outside, a hawk circled high above the snow-covered prairie, hunting for prey driven into the open by the storm. "He was a dreamer," she began. "Came from Ohio with plans to build the finest horse ranch in the territory. Had a way with animals that seemed almost magical. Could calm the wildest Mustang with just his voice and hands." She smiled at the memory. "We met at a dance in Kansas City. I was visiting my aunt, trying to decide whether to follow my father into medicine or accept the marriage proposal from a banker's son. Thomas swept in like a tornado, talking about the West and freedom and building something from nothing. You chose the tornado," Jake observed. "I chose love." Clara's voice grew harder. "Father disowned me. Said I was throwing away my life for a fantasy. Maybe he was right, but I had 2 years of happiness most people never find. We built this cabin together, board by board, started our herd with 3 mares and a stallion bought with every penny we had." She paused, lost in the past. The water rights dispute started small. Thomas's claim included the best year-round spring for miles. Judge Watson approached him personally, all smiles and promises. When Thomas refused to sell, things escalated, fences cut, horses stolen, threats that grew bolder by the day. Why didn't he come to the law? Clara's laugh was bitter. Sheriff Brennan was Watson's man even then. Thomas tried to file complaints, but they disappeared. Then came the day Watson's foreman, Reed, showed up with 5 men, said they were confiscating the land for non-payment of taxes we'd already paid. Thomas stood his ground. Her voice caught. Jake waited, patient. "They shot him on our doorstep." Said he drew first, but Thomas's gun was still holstered when I reached him. Died in my arms while Reed stood there, smirking. At the trial, all 6 men swore Thomas had threatened them, drawn on them. My testimony didn't count. Hysterical widow. They said Watson expressed his sincere condolences and offered to buy the land to help the poor widow. I refused. "And you've been here since, alone." "Stubborn, my father would say, but this land has Thomas's blood in it, his sweat, his dreams. I won't let them take it." She met Jake's eyes. "So you see, we have something in common? We've both seen Watson's justice." Jake shifted, wincing at the movement. He's gotten bolder since then. The Miller family was just the latest. There have been others. Anyone who stands in his way disappears or dies. He owns half the territory through fear or fraud. And you thought you could stop him alone. I thought the law still meant something. Jake's voice was tired. I was a fool. Clara rose, checking his bandages. The shoulder was seeping, but not badly. As she worked, she was aware of his eyes on her. Different from the leering looks she got in town. There was respect there. And something else, recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit. "There," she said, stepping back. "Try not to move it much." Clara. The way he said her name made her pause. "When they come, and they will come, I won't let them hurt you. I'll tell them I forced my way in, threatened you. They won't believe that any more than they believed Thomas was defending himself." Clara moved back to the window. The short winter day was already fading toward dusk. We're past pretty lies. Mr. Hartley. Jake, he corrected. And what do you propose we do? She was quiet for a long moment, watching the shadows lengthen across the snow. In the distance, a wolf howled, answered by another, then another, a pack communicating across the vast wilderness, solitary creatures finding strength in numbers. Did you ever wonder why I stayed? She asked suddenly. Why I didn't go back east, beg my father's forgiveness, marry that banker's son? Pride? Jake suggested. Partly, but mostly because leaving would mean they won. Watson, Reed, all of them. They killed Thomas, but they didn't break what we built together. Every day I survive here, every season I last, is a small victory against them. She turned from the window. Now I have a chance for more than just survival. Jake studied her face in the firelight. You're talking about fighting back. I'm talking about justice. Real justice, not Watson's version. Clara pulled Thomas's journal from a shelf, pages filled with his careful handwriting. He documented everything, every threat, every incident, dates and names. I've added my own observations since, 2 years of evidence of Watson's crimes. Evidence needs someone to listen, Jake pointed out. Watson owns the local law, has influence with the territorial government. But not everyone. There must be honest men somewhere, federal investigators who would listen if presented with enough proof. Clara's eyes blazed with sudden hope. Your word alone might mean nothing. Mine certainly doesn't. But together, with this documentation, together, Jake repeated, testing the word. You're proposing we work together. I'm proposing we survive together, Clara corrected. Pool our knowledge, our resources. You know the law, know which authorities might listen. I know this land, have connections through the ranching families Watson hasn't destroyed yet. Some of them have their own grievances, their own evidence. Jake was quiet, processing. Outside, full darkness had fallen, bringing with it the temperature drop that would freeze the snow into a hard crust by morning, perfect for tracking. Clara realized with a chill. It's dangerous, Jake finally said. Watson has money, men, influence, going after him directly. Is less dangerous than waiting for him to pick us off separately? Clara challenged. You're already a dead man in his eyes. I'm a witness to his methods, a reminder of his crimes. How long before he decides the widow Morrison has lived alone long enough? She saw the truth of it register in Jake's eyes. They were both living on borrowed time, marked by their defiance of Watson's will. All right, Jake said slowly. But if we do this, we do it smart. No heroics, no direct confrontations until we have enough support to make it stick. And Clara, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. This isn't your fight. Thomas is gone. You could still walk away. Start fresh somewhere else. Clara's spine straightened. Could you? Walk away from the Millers, from all the others? Let their murders go unanswered because it's safer? No, Jake admitted. I couldn't. Then don't ask me to be less than you are. Clara moved to tend the fire, adding a log to the dying flames. We'll need a plan. Watson will expect you to run for the territory border. When his men don't find you there, they'll expand the search, check every homestead. Jake's tactical mind was already working. We have maybe 2 days before they get here, assuming the snow slows them down. Then we'd better make good use of them, Clara said, as the fire crackled back to life, casting dancing shadows on the walls. 2 people who had been strangers at sunset began to forge an alliance born of shared loss and common purpose. Outside, the wolves howled again, closer now, hunting in the darkness. But inside the small cabin, a different kind of hunt was beginning, one for justice long denied, and perhaps, though neither would acknowledge it yet, for something more than mere survival. The night stretched long and bitter cold, with the wind rattling the cabin's windows like skeletal fingers demanding entry. Clara had insisted Jake take the bed while she kept watch by the fire, but sleep eluded them both. They were acutely aware of each other's presence, the whisper of breath, the creak of floorboards. the unspoken tension that filled the space between them. Near midnight, Jake emerged from the bedroom, moving stiffly but with better color than before. "You should rest," he said, lowering himself carefully into the chair across from her. "I can keep watch. I've forgotten how to sleep soundly," Clara admitted, pulling her shawl tighter. Even before tonight, the nights were difficult. They sat in companionable silence, the fire painting their faces in amber and shadow. The storm had passed, leaving an eerie quiet broken only by the occasional crack of ice-laden branches in the distance. "Tell me about your mother," Clara said suddenly, surprising herself with the question. "If you don't mind." Jake's expression softened. "She was called Morningstar in her language. Beautiful, fierce, caught between two worlds after she married my father." He stared into the flames. "She tried to teach me both ways, how to read sign and track like her people, how to read books and figure numbers like his. Said I'd need both to survive in the world that was coming. Was she right? More than she knew, though neither set of skills has kept me from this." He gestured at his wounded shoulder, then at the cabin that sheltered them. "She died when I was 12. Fever took her one winter. Father was never the same after. Started drinking, lost his sergeant's stripes. I left at 16, figured the law was a way to honor them both." Clara rose to check the coffee pot, needing movement. As she passed his chair, Jake caught her hand. The touch was gentle but sent electricity through her entire body. "Thank you," he said simply. "Not just for the doctoring, for seeing me as a man, not just a breed or an outlaw." Clara looked down at their joined hands, his dark and calloused, hers pale and work-worn. "We're all outcasts here," she said softly. "Maybe that makes us the only honest people left." She didn't pull away immediately, and neither did he. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass, until a log shifted in the fire and broke the spell. Clara returned to her chair, hyper-aware of the tingling in her palm where his touch lingered. "We should talk practicalities," Jake said, his voice rougher than before. "Come morning, we need a plan that keeps you safe." "I told you, I won't—" "Listen." His tone was urgent now. "I've been thinking, there's a way to protect you, to make it harder for Watson to move against you directly." He paused, seeming to wrestle with the words. "We could marry." Clara's breath caught. "What?" "Hear me out." Jake leaned forward, earnest. "A widow alone is vulnerable. A married woman has legal protections, especially if her husband has connections. I still have friends among the federal marshals, men who owe me favors. As my wife, you'd be under their protection too. A paper marriage," Clara said slowly. "For convenience." "For survival," Jake corrected, though something flickered in his eyes. "It would also explain my presence here if Watson's men come calling. A woman nursing her injured husband raises fewer questions than a widow harboring a fugitive." Clara stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The moon had risen, casting the snow-covered landscape in silver and black. Marriage, even one of convenience, felt like a betrayal of Thomas's memory. Yet the practical part of her mind, the part that had kept her alive these 2 years, recognized the wisdom in Jake's proposal. "And after?" she asked without turning. "When Watson is brought to justice, when the danger passes, then we part ways. If that's what you want, no claims, no obligations." His voice was carefully neutral. "I'm not trying to take advantage. Clara, I'm trying to keep us both alive." She pressed her palm against the cold glass, watching her breath fog the window. Behind her, she heard Jake shift, suppressing a grunt of pain. This man who'd sought justice and found only injustice, who'd lost everything for trying to do right. Was she brave enough to bind her fate to his, even temporarily? "The minister won't perform the ceremony," she said. "Not for you, not for me. There's a traveling preacher, Reverend Morrison, no relation to your Thomas. He's known for being less particular about who he joins. Makes his rounds through the mining camps. Should be in Silver Creek about now." Clara turned. "You've thought this through." "I've had hours to think." Jake met her gaze steadily. "But I won't pressure you. If you have a better idea, I don't, Clara admitted. She moved back to the fire, standing close enough to feel its heat through her skirts. When would we need to do this? Tomorrow, if possible. Before Watson's men widen their search. The practicality of it all made her want to laugh or cry, planning a wedding like a military campaign. Vows as strategy rather than sacrament. Yet, hadn't her first marriage begun with its own kind of recklessness, throwing away everything safe for love and dreams? All right, she said quietly. But I have conditions. Jake nodded, waiting. We maintain separate quarters. You'll recover in the main room. I'll fashion a proper sleeping space. No, expectations beyond what's necessary for appearances. Of course. And we work as equals in bringing down Watson. My knowledge, my connections are just as valuable as yours. No protecting the little woman nonsense. A ghost of a smile crossed Jake's face. I wouldn't dare. I've seen you with that shotgun. Good. Clara finally sat back down, exhausted by the weight of the decision. There's one more thing. Thomas's grave is on the hill behind the barn. I visit every Sunday. That won't change. I wouldn't expect it to. Jake's voice was gentle. He was a lucky man, to be loved so well. They fell quiet again, each lost in thought. The fire had burned low, casting more shadows than light. Clara found herself studying Jake's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way pain and determination had carved premature lines around his eyes. He was handsome in a raw, unpolished way. Nothing like Thomas's easy charm, but compelling nonetheless. Clara, Jake said suddenly, what if I'm wrong? What if marriage makes you more of a target, not less? She considered this, then shook her head. We're already targets. At least together we might have a fighting chance. A rueful smile touched her lips. Besides, the town already whispers about the cursed widow Morrison. What's one more scandal? Is that what they call you? Among other things, Black Widow is a favorite, especially among the church ladies. Clara's voice held more hurt than she intended to show, as if I somehow caused Thomas's death by loving him too much. Jake's expression darkened. Small minds need someone to blame for their fears. Makes them feel safer to point at others' misfortune. Speaking from experience, a half-breed lawman was never popular, even before I went after Watson. Too white for the reservation, too Indian for the town. The badge gave me purpose, respect, or so I thought. Turns out it was just borrowed authority, easily revoked. Clara reached for the coffee pot, pouring the last of it into their cups. Her hand trembled slightly as she handed Jake his. We're a pair, aren't we? The cursed widow and the outcast lawman. Could be a dime novel, Jake agreed, accepting the cup. Their fingers brushed again, and this time Clara didn't pull away as quickly, though I doubt it would have a happy ending. Maybe we write our own ending. Clara suggested, maybe that's what Thomas would want, not for me to wither away here alone, but to fight for the justice he was denied. Jake studied her over the rim of his cup. You're stronger than you know. Clara Morrison. Soon to be Clara Hartley, she corrected with a wry smile. Lord knows what Thomas would think of that. I think, Jake said carefully, he'd want you to survive, by any means necessary. The wind picked up again outside, howling through the canyon like a living thing. Clara shivered despite the fire's warmth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a dangerous journey to find the preacher, a marriage born of necessity rather than love, the continued threat of Watson's vengeance. But tonight, in this moment, she wasn't alone. We should try to rest, she said finally. Dawn will come soon enough. Jake nodded, rising stiffly. Clara, I want you to know, I'll honor this arrangement, every part of it. You have my word. I know, she said simply. I wouldn't have agreed otherwise. As Jake made his way back to the bedroom, Clara remained by the dying fire. She thought of Thomas, of the dreams they'd shared in this very room. Would he understand what she was about to do? Would he forgive her for taking another man's name, even in pretense? The wind answered with its lonely howl, and Clara pulled her shawl closer, Tomorrow she would become a bride again. Not for love, but for survival. It wasn't the life she'd chosen, but it was the one she'd been given. And Clara Morrison, soon to be Hartley, was nothing if not a survivor. She banked the fire and settled into her chair for what remained of the night, shotgun across her lap and ears alert for any sound of approaching riders. Whatever came with the dawn, she would meet it head on, as she always had. But this time, she wouldn't face it alone. Dawn broke cold and crystal clear, the storm's fury replaced by a deceptive calm. Clara woke with a start, having dozed in her chair despite her intentions. Her first thought was to check on Jake, who she found sitting up in bed, already dressed and checking his revolver with practiced efficiency. "How's the shoulder?" she asked from the doorway. "Stiff but manageable." He looked up, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "Are you certain about this? There's still time to reconsider." "The time for second thoughts was last night," Clara replied firmly. "I'll ready the wagon." An hour later, they set out for Silver Creek, Jake's black stallion tied behind Clara's modest wagon. Jake sat beside her on the bench, his coat arranged to hide the worst of the blood stains. To any casual observer, they might have been any couple traveling to town, though Clara kept the shotgun within easy reach beneath a blanket. The journey took most of the morning, the horses struggling through snowdrifts that hadn't yet been broken by other travelers. Jake remained alert despite his injury, scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. Clara found herself stealing glances at him, noting how naturally he seemed to fit into this harsh landscape, how his mixed heritage showed in the way he read the land's subtle signs. Silver Creek was smaller than Cedar Ridge, a mining town that had seen better days. The main street was thick with mud and slush, lined with businesses that catered to men seeking quick fortunes and quicker pleasures. Clara kept her eyes forward as they passed saloons already rowdy despite the early hour. They found Reverend Morrison at the small chapel at the town's edge, a man whose weathered face and calloused hands spoke of a life lived rough before finding his calling. He looked them over with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. Jake's injury, Clara's widow's clothes, the tension between them. "Marriage is a sacred covenant," he said slowly, "not to be entered lightly." "We understand," Jake replied, producing a small leather pouch. "We're prepared to make a donation to your mission." The Reverend's expression softened slightly at the sight of the gold coins. "And do you have witnesses?" Clara's heart sank. She hadn't thought of that requirement, but Jake nodded toward the door. "There's a couple outside who've agreed to stand for us, fellow travelers we met on the road." Clara turned, surprised to see an older Mexican couple entering the chapel. The woman smiled kindly at Clara, while the man nodded respectfully to Jake. Later, Clara would learn Jake had helped them escape bandits years ago, another debt of gratitude in a land where such connections meant survival. The ceremony was brief and businesslike. Clara stood beside Jake, acutely aware of his presence, the heat of him despite the chapel's chill. When prompted, she removed Thomas's ring with trembling fingers, placing it carefully in her pocket. Jake produced a simple gold band where he'd gotten it. She didn't ask, and slipped it onto her finger with unexpected gentleness. "Do you, Jacob Hartley, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the Reverend intoned. "I do." Jake's voice was steady, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. "Do you, Clara Morrison, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Clara hesitated for just a heartbeat, feeling Thomas's ring warm against her palm through the fabric of her pocket. Then, "I do. Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Dakota, I pronounce you man and wife." The Reverend paused meaningfully. "You may kiss your bride." Clara hadn't anticipated this part. Jake leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. His lips brushed hers with surprising softness, a brief touch that nevertheless sent warmth flooding through her. It was nothing like Thomas's eager kisses, but it stirred something in her she hadn't expected. "May God have mercy on you both," the Reverend said, which seemed an odd blessing until Clara realized he probably knew exactly who Jake was and what they were risking. Outside the chapel, Jake shook hands with the Mexican man, exchanging a few words in Spanish. The woman pressed a small wooden cross into Clara's hands, murmuring a blessing. Then they were gone, disappearing into the town's busy streets as quietly as they'd appeared. "Old friends?" Clara asked as they returned to the wagon. "After a fashion, Miguel once said if I ever needed anything." Jake winced as he climbed onto the bench. "I never thought I'd call in that favor for this." They were halfway back to the cabin when they saw the dust cloud on the horizon. Jake tensed beside her, hand moving to his gun. "Company coming. 3 riders, maybe 4. Clara's heart raced as she urged the horses to a faster pace. They couldn't outrun mounted men with the wagon, and Jake was in no condition for a gunfight. But as the riders drew closer, Jake relaxed slightly. "It's all right. That's Sam Daniels in the lead. He owns the Double D Ranch north of town. Good man, no friend of Watson." The riders intercepted them just as they reached the turnoff to Clara's property. Sam Daniels was a grizzled man in his 50s, face weathered by decades of sun and wind. His sharp eyes took in Clara's new ring and Jake's protective positioning. "Mrs. Morrison." Sam touched his hat brim. "Or should I say Mrs. Hartley now? Word travels fast from Silver Creek." "Mr. Daniels." Clara nodded, wary. "Jake." Sam's greeting was warmer. "Heard you had some trouble with Judge Watson." "You could say that," Jake replied carefully. Sam leaned forward in his saddle. "Also heard Watson's men are tearing apart the countryside looking for you. They hit the Widow Thompson's place this morning, scared her something fierce." His expression hardened. "Getting mighty tired of Watson thinking he owns this territory." "Sam," one of the other riders warned. "This ain't our fight." "The hell it ain't." Sam spat tobacco juice into the snow. "Watson's been eyeing my water rights for months. Only a matter of time before he comes for the Double D like he did the Morrison place." He looked directly at Clara. "Your Thomas was a good man, ma'am. What they did to him wasn't right." "No," Clara agreed quietly. "It wasn't." Sam studied them both for a long moment. "You folks get on home. If Watson's men come by the Double D asking questions. We haven't seen hide nor hair of Jake Hartley, far as we know. He lit out for Montana yesterday." "Sam," Jake began, but the older man cut him off. "Don't say nothing. Just remember you got friends in this territory. Friends who remember what the law's supposed to mean." He gathered his reins. "Ma'am, you need anything, you send word. My Mary's been after me to check on you anyway. See if you needed supplies or such." As the riders departed, Clara felt a spark of hope. They weren't as alone as she'd thought. There were others who'd suffered under Watson's rule, others who might stand with them when the time came. The sun was setting by the time they reached the cabin, painting the snow blood red. Clara helped Jake inside, noting how he'd paled during the journey, the wedding, the travel, the encounter with Sam. It had all taken a toll on his healing body. "You need to rest," she said firmly, guiding him to the bed she'd made up near the fireplace. "Clara." He caught her hand as she turned to go. "Today, I know it wasn't what you wanted. I'm sorry for that." She looked down at their joined hands, at the simple gold band that felt foreign on her finger. "We do what we must to survive," she said. "But Jake, thank you for making it dignified, for not treating it like a joke." "It's not a joke to me," he said seriously. "Paper marriage or not, I made vows today. I intend to keep them." Clara gently freed her hand, unsettled by the intensity in his eyes. "Rest now. I'll make some supper." As she busied herself with preparing their meal, Clara tried to process the day's events. She was a married woman again, bound to a man she'd known for barely 2 days, a man who stirred feelings in her she'd thought buried with Thomas. It was dangerous, this attraction. They'd agreed to a business arrangement, nothing more. Yet, as she watched Jake sleep by the fire, his face peaceful for the first time since she'd found him, Clara couldn't deny the truth. Something had shifted when he kissed her in that chapel. Something that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with the way her heart had responded to his touch. Outside, night was falling fast, bringing with it new dangers and uncertainties. Watson's men were searching, growing closer with each hour. But inside the cabin, in the circle of firelight, Clara Hartley, the name still strange in her mind, allowed herself a moment of something almost like contentment. She wasn't alone anymore. Whatever came next, she would face it with a partner. Unexpected though he might be, by morning she was his bride. Clara murmured to herself, remembering the old fortune teller in Kansas City who'd read her palm years ago. The woman had spoken of two great loves in Clara's life, separated by loss but joined by courage. Clara had laughed then, secure in Thomas's arms. She wasn't laughing now. The fire crackled and settled, sending sparks up the chimney like small prayers to the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, Clara would stand guard over her unexpected husband and the fragile hope that had taken root between them. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The weeks that followed their hasty marriage passed in a strange rhythm of domesticity and danger. Jake's shoulder healed slowly but steadily under Clara's care, and they fell into a routine that felt both foreign and oddly natural. By day, they worked together, Jake helping with what chores he could manage, Clara continuing her mending work for the few clients who still employed her. By night, they planned their campaign against Watson, documenting evidence and reaching out carefully to potential allies. The cabin that had once echoed with Clara's solitude now hummed with quiet conversation and shared purpose. Jake had proved himself useful beyond her expectations, repairing things Thomas had left unfinished, improving their defenses with the tactical mind of a lawman. He never complained about sleeping in the main room, never pressed for more than the companionship they shared over meals and evening talks. Yet Clara found herself increasingly aware of him, the way he moved with quiet efficiency despite his injury, how his rare smiles transformed his stern features, the gentle way he handled her horses. When their hands brushed during daily tasks, she no longer pulled away. When she caught him watching her with that intense gaze, she didn't immediately look elsewhere. One afternoon, as Clara worked on patching a shirt, Jake spread papers across the table, maps, names, connections he'd been piecing together. "Watson's empire is bigger than I realized," he said. "He doesn't just control Cedar Ridge. His influence reaches into the territorial government, the railroad companies, even some federal positions. But every empire has weak points." Clara set aside her sewing to study the documents. "The sheriff in Deadwood, you marked him as clean?" "John Palmer. We served together years back. He's tough but honest. No love for corruption. If we could get evidence to him, real solid proof, he might be willing to move against Watson. That's a long way to travel with Watson's men watching the roads." Jake nodded grimly. "We'd need to be smart about it. And we'd need more than just our word and Thomas's journal. We need witnesses willing to testify. Documents Watson can't deny." A knock at the door made them both freeze. Jake's hand went to his gun as Clara moved to the window. She relaxed slightly at what she saw. "It's Mary Daniels," she said, surprised. "Sam's wife." Clara opened the door to find a plump, pleasant-faced woman holding a basket, but Mary's usual cheerful demeanor was tempered with worry. "Clara, dear, or should I call you Mrs. Hartley now?" Mary entered without waiting for invitation, her sharp eyes taking in Jake's presence with approval. "Good, you're both here. We need to talk." She set her basket on the table, pushing aside Jake's papers with practiced efficiency. "Sam sent me with supplies, but that's not the real reason I'm here. There's been developments you need to know about." Clara poured coffee as Mary settled herself. "What kind of developments?" "Watson's getting desperate. His men tore apart the Jenkins place yesterday. Claimed they were looking for stolen cattle, but everyone knows they were hunting for your husband." Mary nodded at Jake. "When they didn't find anything, they burned the barn, just to make a point." Jake's expression darkened. "Anyone hurt?" "No, thank the Lord. But folks are scared. Some are talking about forming a vigilance committee, taking matters into their own hands." Mary's voice dropped. Sam's trying to keep them calm, but people are tired of living under Watson's boot. Vigilante justice won't solve anything, Jake said. It'll just give Watson an excuse to crack down harder, maybe call in federal troops to restore order. That's what Sam says. But people need hope, need to know someone's doing something. Mary looked between them meaningfully. Word is you two are working on bringing Watson down legal-like. That true? Clara glanced at Jake, who nodded slightly. It's true, but we need time, and we need people willing to stand up in court, not just whisper in kitchens. Mary reached into her basket, pulling out a leather folder. Then maybe this will help. It's from Sam's safe, copies of every shady deal Watson's pushed through in the last 5 years. Land transfers that don't add up, tax records that got changed, permits for water rights that somehow ended up in Watson's name instead of the original claimants. Jake examined the documents with growing excitement. This is exactly what we need, but Sam's taking a huge risk giving us these. Sam's already at risk. We all are, long as Watson runs this territory like his personal kingdom. Mary's chin lifted defiantly. My children deserve better than growing up afraid. We all deserve better. Over the next hour, Mary shared more intelligence. Which of Watson's men might be convinced to turn? Which officials were clean? Who else among the ranchers might join their cause? Clara felt a surge of admiration for this woman who'd seemed merely a pleasant neighbor but proved to have steel beneath her pleasant exterior. As Mary prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Clara, can I speak plain? Of course. Mary glanced at Jake, then back to Clara. I know this marriage started as convenience, protection, but I see how you two look at each other when you think the other's not watching. Don't let Watson steal any more from you than he already has. You deserve happiness, both of you. After she left, Clara busied herself putting away the supplies, aware of Jake's eyes on her. The cabin felt smaller suddenly, charged with unspoken words. She's right, you know, Jake said quietly, about deserving happiness. Clara's hand stilled on a jar of preserves. Jake, I know what we agreed. I'm not asking for anything to change. He moved closer, not quite touching, but near enough that she could feel his warmth. But I need you to know, these weeks with you, they've been the closest thing to peace I've found in years. Clara turned to face him, her heart racing. We can't. It wouldn't be fair to Thomas's memory, or to you. You deserve more than a woman still grieving her first husband. And you deserve more than a broken-down lawman with a price on his head. Jake's smile was sad. Maybe that's why we fit. Two people who deserve better, making do with what they have. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Then Jake stepped back, breaking the spell. I'll check the horses. That night, Clara lay awake thinking about Mary's words, about the look in Jake's eyes, about the way her heart had begun to race whenever he was near. She touched Thomas's ring, still worn on a chain around her neck, seeking guidance from a love now silent. What she found instead was a different truth. Thomas had loved her fiercely, completely. He would want that same fullness of life for her, not this half-existence she'd been living. The question was whether she was brave enough to reach for it. A sound from the main room drew her attention. Through the cracked door, she could see Jake sitting by the dying fire, studying the documents Mary had brought, his dedication to justice, his careful respect for her boundaries, his quiet strength. When had admiration turned to something deeper? Clara rose, wrapping a shawl around her nightgown. Jake looked up as she entered, concern flickering across his features. Couldn't sleep, she explained, settling into the chair across from him. Too much to think about. The documents Mary brought, not just that. Clara took a breath, gathering courage. Jake, what are we doing? Really doing? Because I don't think either of us believes this is just about bringing down Watson anymore. Jake set aside the papers, giving her his full attention. In the firelight, she could see the vulnerability he usually kept hidden. What do you want it to be about? I don't know, Clara admitted. When I found you that night, I was just trying to survive one more day, Then we married for protection, for strategy. But somewhere along the way, she trailed off, unable to finish. Somewhere along the way, it became real. Jake finished softly. At least for me. Clara's breath caught. Jake, I'm not asking you to love me, he said quickly. I know your heart belongs to Thomas. But Clara, what we have, this partnership, this understanding, it's more than most people find. Maybe that's enough. Clara stood, crossing to the window where frost painted delicate patterns on the glass. My mother once told me the heart has infinite capacity for love. That loving one person doesn't diminish what you felt for another. She turned back to him. I've been so afraid that caring for you meant betraying Thomas. But maybe it just means I'm still alive. Jake rose, moving toward her slowly, giving her every chance to retreat. When she didn't, he raised his hand to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. You are the strongest woman I've ever known, Clara Hartley, he said. And if you'll let me, I'd like to spend whatever time we have making sure you never have to be strong alone again. Clara leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. When she opened them, she saw her own hope reflected in his gaze. Whatever time we have, she repeated. Whether it's days or decades. However long, Jake agreed. It will be enough. When he kissed her this time, it wasn't the brief touch of their wedding day. This was a promise, deep and sure, between two souls who had found each other in the darkness. Clara kissed him back, pouring into it all the loneliness of the past 2 years, all the unexpected joy of the past weeks, all the fragile hope for whatever future they might carve from this unforgiving land. Outside, clouds gathered on the horizon, promising another storm. But inside the small cabin, two hearts began the slow, careful work of building something new from the ashes of what had been. It wouldn't be easy. Watson still hunted them. Danger still lurked. Justice still demanded its due. But for tonight, in the circle of each other's arms, they had found something worth fighting for beyond vengeance or survival. They had found the possibility of love again, unexpected and hard-won, blooming like a wildflower in the harsh soil of the frontier. And like all wild things, it would either perish quickly or sink roots so deep that nothing could tear it loose. Only time would tell which fate awaited them. The storm that had been building for weeks finally broke on a cold March morning. Clara was feeding the chickens when she heard the thunder of approaching horses, too many to be friendly visitors. She dropped the feed bucket and ran for the cabin, but Jake was already at the door, rifle in hand. Get inside, he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of his former badge. Take the shotgun and watch the back window. Through the front window, Clara counted 8 riders approaching fast, led by a man she recognized with a chill of fear, Reed, Watson's foreman, the man who had killed Thomas. Beside him rode Sheriff Brennan, his star glinting in the weak morning sun. Hartley, Reed's voice carried across the distance. We know you're in there. Come out peaceable-like, and the woman won't be hurt. Jake's jaw tightened. Stay down, he told Clara. No matter what happens. Jake, no! But he was already opening the door, stepping onto the porch with his rifle held loose but ready. Clara moved to the window, shotgun trembling in her hands. Reed, Jake acknowledged coldly. Brennan didn't expect Watson to send his whole pack of dogs. Reed's smile was ugly. Judge Watson wants to see you real bad. Breed. Got questions about some missing documents, some stirring up of folks who should know better than to cause trouble. Only trouble here is you boys trespassing on private property, Jake replied. My wife and I are law-abiding citizens. You got a warrant? Sheriff Brennan shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Now, Jake, no need for formalities between old friends. Why don't you just come along quiet? No one needs to get hurt. Funny how you're worried about people getting hurt now. Clara called from inside, unable to contain herself. Where was that concern when you let Reed murder my first husband? Reed's face darkened. Your husband drew on us. Widow. Just like this one's about to if he doesn't drop that rifle. The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Clara could see Jake calculating odds, measuring distances, 8 against 1, with her life in the balance. The mathematics of frontier justice were brutal and simple. Then everything happened at once. A rifle shot cracked from the hills, not from Reed's men, but behind them. Sam Daniels and 6 other ranchers appeared on the ridgeline. Weapons trained on Watson's crew. Reed's horse danced nervously as its rider twisted to assess this new threat. "Morning, Reed," Sam called down pleasantly. "Seems you boys are a long way from town. Got lost. Did you—" "This ain't your business, Daniels," Reed snarled. "Man can't visit his neighbors without it being someone's business." Sam's voice hardened. "Though I do wonder what brings the sheriff all the way out here without proper papers. Seems irregular." More riders appeared. The Jennings brothers from the east, old Coleman from the Box C ranch, even the Mexican families from the valley. Clara's heart swelled as she realized what was happening. Their careful alliance building had borne fruit at the crucial moment. Reed's men grew visibly nervous, outnumbered now and caught in the open. But Reed himself just smiled, reaching slowly into his coat. "Got something here might interest you all. A telegram from the territorial governor, offering amnesty to anyone who helps bring in the fugitive Jake Hartley." He raised his voice. $500 bounty. That's more than most of you see in a year." There was a moment of silence as the offer hung in the air. Then old Coleman spat tobacco juice and said, "Keep your blood money. Reed, we know who the real criminals are in this territory." "You're making a mistake," Sheriff Brennan warned. "All of you. Judge Watson won't forget this. Neither will we." Mary Daniels called out, appearing with several other women armed with rifles. "We won't forget the Millers, or Thomas Morrison, or any of the others Watson's killed for their land. You want Jake Hartley? You'll have to go through all of us." Reed's face contorted with rage, but he was trapped and knew it. Any violence here would be a massacre, with his men caught in a crossfire. Clara could see him weighing options, looking for a way out that preserved his authority. It was then that fate intervened in the form of a lone rider approaching fast from the direction of town. As he drew closer, Clara recognized him, Deputy Federal Marshal Tom Garrett, one of the few honest lawmen in the territory. "Marshal Garrett," Jake called out, still holding his position. "Good to see you." Garrett surveyed the scene with practiced eyes, taking in the armed standoff. "Gentlemen, ladies," he touched his hat brim. "Seems I'm just in time. Sheriff Brennan, Mr. Reed, I'll need you and your men to disperse. This is now a federal matter." You got no jurisdiction here." "Garrett," Brennan protested. "Actually, I do." Garrett produced a document. "Judge Watson is under federal investigation for corruption, murder, and land fraud. Any attempt to intimidate witnesses in that investigation is a federal crime." His voice carried the weight of legitimate authority. "Unless you'd all like to join him in custody." Reed's hand twitched toward his gun, and Clara's breath caught. This was the moment of maximum danger, when cornered men might choose violence over surrender. But Jake spoke first, his voice cutting through the tension. "Reed," he said quietly, "I know you killed Thomas Morrison, just like I know you killed the Millers on Watson's orders. But right now, you've got a choice. Ride away. Maybe flee the territory before the federal marshals come for you, or draw that gun and die here in the dirt. What's it going to be?" For a long moment, Reed stared at Jake with naked hatred. Then, slowly, he turned his horse. "This isn't over, Breed. Not by a long shot." "Yes," Jake said firmly. "It is." One by one, Watson's men wheeled their horses and rode away, Sheriff Brennan trailing behind with one last venomous look. Only when they were dots on the horizon did Clara realize she'd been holding her breath. Marshal Garrett dismounted, approaching Jake with an extended hand. "Good to see you still alive. Jake, got your message through Sam Daniels. The evidence you've gathered, combined with what we've collected independently, should be enough to bring Watson down." Clara emerged from the cabin, still clutching the shotgun. Jake immediately moved to her side, his arm going around her waist in a gesture that was both protective and affectionate. Mrs. Hartley. Garrett nodded respectfully. Your courage in standing by Jake, documenting Watson's crimes, it's made all the difference. Thomas would be proud. The mention of Thomas's name sent a pang through Clara, but it was gentler now, tempered by the knowledge that justice was finally at hand. What happens now? She asked. Now we build an airtight case. Garrett replied, with the testimonies of everyone here, the documents you've preserved, and what Jake witnessed, Watson will face federal charges. It won't bring back the dead, but it might prevent future murders. As Garrett spoke with Jake about logistics, Clara found herself surrounded by their neighbors, people who had risked everything to stand with them. Mary Daniels embraced her warmly, tears in both their eyes. You did it, Mary whispered. You and Jake both. You gave us hope when we'd almost lost it. But even in victory, danger lingered. As the crowd began to disperse, Sam Daniels pulled Jake aside, speaking low and urgent. Clara caught only fragments. Reed won't let this go, and watch your backs. That night, as they sat together before the fire, the cabin felt different. The constant weight of fear had lifted, replaced by a cautious optimism. Jake had shed his coat and gun belt, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. It's not over, Clara said, voicing what they both knew. Reed's still out there. Watson still has resources. Influence. No, Jake agreed. But the tide has turned. For the first time, the law is on our side. He studied her face in the firelight. Any regrets? About what? This morning you could have claimed that bounty, been set for a long while. No one would have blamed you. Clara moved to sit beside him on the small settee, taking his hand. The only thing I regret is that it took me so long to see past my grief. Thomas is gone, and I'll always love him. But you... She squeezed his hand. You've given me a reason to look forward instead of back. Jake lifted their joined hands, kissing her knuckles gently. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Together. Clara agreed. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, but it no longer sounded lonely to Clara's ears. It sounded like freedom, like justice, like a future worth fighting for. The battle with Watson wasn't over, but they had won this day, and in the harsh arithmetic of frontier life, sometimes one day's victory was all you could ask for. One day, and someone to share it with when the smoke cleared. In her heart, Clara felt Thomas's blessing like a warm breeze. He had loved justice as much as he'd loved her. He would understand that in fighting for one, she had found the other, and in Jake Hartley, she had found both a partner in that fight and a love she hadn't dared hope for. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they were alive. They were together, and for now, that was everything. The federal trial of Judge Watson made headlines across the territory. For 3 weeks that spring, the courthouse in Yankton became the center of a drama that would reshape the Dakota frontier. Jake testified for hours, his quiet authority and detailed evidence painting a damning picture of corruption and murder. Clara sat in the gallery every day, her presence a silent support that gave him strength. Watson's expensive lawyers fought hard, but the parade of witnesses proved overwhelming. Ranchers who'd lost land, families who'd lost loved ones, even some of Watson's own men who chose saving themselves over loyalty, all told their stories. When Clara took the stand to testify about Thomas's murder, her clear voice carrying across the packed courtroom, even hardened reporters wiped their eyes. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. Guilty on all counts. Watson would spend his remaining years in federal prison, his empire dismantled, his stolen lands returned to their rightful owners. As they led him away, he locked eyes with Jake one final time, but the venom there had been replaced by the hollow look of a man who'd gambled everything and lost. But Reed had vanished like smoke, disappearing the night before federal marshals came to arrest him. Some said he'd fled to Mexico, others that he'd gone north to Canada. Jake suspected he was still nearby, waiting for his chance at revenge. It was a shadow that lingered even as they tried to rebuild their lives. With Watson gone and his men scattered, Cedar Ridge began to change. Sheriff Brennan resigned in disgrace, replaced by an honest lawman from Deadwood. The town that had shunned Clara began to treat her with newfound respect, though she found it hard to forget their coldness when she'd needed kindness most. Spring gave way to summer, and with it came a season of growth. Jake's shoulder had healed completely, leaving only a scar to mark his brush with death. He'd been offered his marshal's badge back but turned it down, choosing instead to focus on building up the ranch with Clara. Together, they repaired fences, expanded the garden, and slowly brought Thomas's dream of a horse ranch back to life. It was on a golden evening in July, as they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the grasslands crimson, that Jake finally spoke the words that had been growing between them. "I love you, Clara," he said simply. "Not as a convenience or arrangement, but truly, you've become my whole world." Clara set aside the shirt she'd been mending, one of his now, not for pay, but for love. "I love you too," she replied, the words coming easier than she'd expected. "It doesn't diminish what I felt for Thomas. It's different, but just as real, just as deep." He pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the hawks wheel against the darkening sky. They'd found something precious in the ashes of tragedy, a love tempered by loss but strengthened by shared purpose. The attack came 3 nights later. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and Jake's urgent hand on her shoulder. Through the window, she could see flames licking at the barn, Reed's calling card. Surely, Jake was already reaching for his gun when the first shots shattered the window. "Stay down!" Jake shouted, returning fire through the broken glass. In the flickering firelight, Clara could see riders circling the cabin, at least 6 of them. Reed had recruited new men for his vengeance. Clara grabbed the shotgun, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her. This was different from the morning standoff. No witnesses, no backup coming. Just them against men bent on murder. "The root cellar," Jake said between shots. "If we can make it there." A bullet splintered the door frame inches from his head. They were pinned down. The barn fully ablaze now, casting dancing shadows across the yard. Clara's horses screamed in terror, and her heart broke knowing she couldn't save them. Then, impossibly, she heard a war cry that made her blood run cold. Not from Reed's men, but from beyond them. Riders emerged from the darkness, Lakota warriors, painted for battle, their rifles speaking with deadly accuracy. Reed's men, caught between the cabin and this new threat, scattered in panic. Jake pulled Clara back from the window, shielding her with his body as the battle raged outside. The fight was brief but vicious, ending with Reed's men fled or fallen. In the sudden quiet that followed, a familiar voice called out in Lakota. Jake answered in the same language, then translated for Clara. "It's my cousin, Joseph Running Bear, my mother's nephew." They emerged cautiously to find a dozen Lakota warriors dismounting in their yard. Joseph, a man about Jake's age with intelligent eyes and ritual scars marking him as a warrior of standing, embraced Jake warmly. "We heard what you did," Joseph said in accented English. "For Clara's benefit, standing against the man who killed our people, who stole our lands. My mother, your aunt, said we could not let you fight alone." But Reed had escaped again, vanishing into the night like the ghost he'd become. They found his horse abandoned a mile away, blood on the saddle suggesting he'd been wounded but not killed. As dawn broke over the smoldering ruins of the barn, Clara surveyed the damage. They'd lost the structure Thomas had built, most of their winter feed, and 3 good horses. But they were alive, and for the first time truly free of Watson's shadow. "We'll rebuild," Jake said, reading her thoughts. "Bigger, better." "Yes," Clara agreed, then added with a small smile, "but maybe with less flammable materials this time." Joseph and his warriors stayed to help with the cleanup, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the townspeople who came to offer aid. Seeing Jake welcomed by his mother's people, working alongside them, began to shift perceptions that had been carved in stone. Even the minister's wife brought food, mumbling something about Christian charity. It took a month to raise the new barn, the whole community coming together in a way that would have seemed impossible under Watson's rule. As Clara watched Jake working alongside Sam Daniels and Joseph Running Bear, she saw the future taking shape, a place where the lines that divided people might blur, where justice meant more than power. Marshall Garrett visited one last time in early August, bringing news that made Clara sag with relief. "Reed's dead," he said simply. "Tried to rob a bank in Cheyenne, got himself shot by the guards, died cursing your names, but died all the same." That night, Clara and Jake walked to the hill where Thomas lay buried. She'd brought wildflowers, as she did every week, but this time Jake came with her. They stood in respectful silence as she arranged the blooms on the grave. "Thank you," she whispered to the stone marker, "for loving me, for bringing me here, for everything that led to this moment." She felt Jake's hand slip into hers. "I'll take care of the land. The dream, we both will." As they walked back down the hill, the sunset painting the grasslands gold, Clara felt a sense of completion. The long, dark night that had begun with Thomas's death was finally ending. Justice had been served, wounds had healed, and love had found a way to bloom again in the harsh soil of the frontier. "What now?" Jake asked as they reached the cabin, their cabin, built stronger after the fire. "Now we live," Clara said simply. "We work the land, raise horses, maybe children someday. We help our neighbors and stand for what's right. We build the life Thomas dreamed of, that you fought for, that we earned with blood and tears and courage." Jake stopped walking, turning her to face him. "Clara Hartley, you are my redemption, my hope, my heart. Every day with you is a gift I never thought I'd receive." "And you," Clara replied, reaching up to touch his face, "are proof that the darkest night can lead to the brightest dawn. You chose justice when it would have been easier to choose vengeance. You chose love when your heart had every reason to stay closed. You chose mercy, just as I did that night in the storm." They kissed there in the gathering dusk, two souls who had found each other in the depths of winter and emerged into the warmth of summer. Around them, the prairie stretched endless and free, no longer a place of exile but a canvas for dreams rebuilt and love reborn. As they entered their home, hand in hand, Clara thought about the fortune-teller's prophecy of two great loves. She'd thought the second would be lesser, a pale shadow of the first. Instead, she'd learned that the heart's capacity for love was infinite, that joy could coexist with remembered sorrow, that choosing life after loss was not betrayal, but the ultimate honor to those who'd gone before. The lamp in the window glowed warm against the night, a beacon of hope in the vast darkness. Inside, two people who'd chosen mercy in their darkest hours built a life together, proof that on the unforgiving frontier, love and justice could still prevail. They'd paid for their happiness in blood and struggle, but that only made it more precious. In the end, it was a simple truth that sustained them. They'd found each other in the storm, chosen compassion over expedience, and discovered that sometimes the greatest loves are those that come when you least expect them, blooming wild and strong in ground watered by tears but warmed by an indomitable hope. Their story would be told around frontier fires for generations. The widow who chose mercy in the night, the lawman who chose justice over safety, and the love that grew between them like a wildflower in the desert, beautiful and enduring against all odds. It was a testament to the power of the human heart to heal, to hope, and to love again, even in the harshest of lands. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, loss, and redemption in the Wild West. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect across the miles, just like Clara and Jake connected across their differences. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more tales of frontier courage and romance. And please share your thoughts about Clara and Jake's journey. Did their story touch your heart as it did mine? Let me know in the comments.